This is about duty and how we search for truth.
A system which pits friends against each other can't be the answer.
When people of good conscience have an...
Hello, space friends! Welcome back to this week's Star Trek Sodium. We've got facts from Star Trek Next Generation Series 2, Episode 9, famous episode, The Measure of a Man. Now, during this episode, we endure the story of Starfleet trying to transfer data so that space experts can take him apart and discover how to make similar cybernetic characters. Now on to the facts. Actress Marina Citrus does not speak a single word in this episode. Those of you who have eagle eyes will be bold enough to admit that she appears in the episode indeed during a scene in 10 Forward, and yet doesn't utter a single word. Not hair, not feelings, not apple, not a single word. That's because, possibly as a new student at a Hollywood Taekwondo class, she was struck in the throat by her opponent during one particularly violent bout. Rushed to the local medic, he advised her that there's no lasting damage, but she mustn't strain her vocal bits for a few days by making sounds, be it talking, burping, or screaming. As a cost-cutting measure, Rick Burman ensured that she only received half of her usual pay for the episode. He was overheard by Lever Burton telling Marina that in space, no one can hear you scream. Burton, of course, was feeling extremely sorry for having been the one to have struck Marina in the neck with his deadly thrust, and this incident is the one that made him decide not to continue with his martial arts career. His cousin Tim even remarked to Lever that even if he doesn't want to pursue Taekwondo championships, maybe he could use some of the skills he learned during the martial arts classes to work as one of the Joker's goons in the upcoming Batman movie. Lever was grateful for the idea, but wanted to be seen as an intelligent character on the screen, not as a common goon. Therefore, Lever Burton does not appear in Batman, despite what the rumours might say.
Remember yours.
I have never forgotten it. Not then, and certainly not now.
It was during this production that the Great War of 1988 was really starting to heat up. Star Trek's science fiction rival, Short Circuit 2, was halfway through its production, and Rick Burman caught wind of what had been happening between Star Trek and Short Circuit 2. As a wild form of retaliation, Rick called the cinema owner of his hometown in Burkeville, Arizona, and told him that if he shows any Short Circuit films at the cinemas, then Rick would block them from ever having any future Star Trek movies distributed there. So the owner of Boca View Picture Houses owned both of the movie theatres in the town, and so Rick gained a measurable victory over Short Circuit 2. There was no way that any Short Circuit films would be making any money in that town. Rumour has it that he even called a meeting with the Star Trek actors to brag about his manoeuvre, and he was happy to finally be considered as one of the boys. Between the filming and production of Season 1 and Season 2, the actors of Star Trek enjoyed a month at home, having Christmas with their families. One possibly well-documented accident happened during this time. On Christmas Eve, as Riker actor was having a hot chocolate drink when he spilled it down his chin and down all his clothes. After changing his clothes, his family pointed out that he had a horrifically burned chin, and with Star Trek coming back to the screen within months, he had an idea. Luckily, Frakes was able to grow hair rather speedily, so within just a few wild weeks, he returned to the studio for Season 2 with a well-formed beard, completely concealing the hot chocolate burn. Initially, Rick Burman told him to stay away with that beard on his face, but soon changed his mind when he got nostalgic for his own bearded father. It was during the filming of The Measure of a Man that Michael Dorn actor Worf brought his girlfriend, Janet Jackson, to the studio. Not a fan of Star Trek at all, she wasn't even slightly interested in watching Worf film his scenes. Instead, she approached Gene Roddenberry with a glamorous idea. She had written words to the classic Star Trek Next Generation theme music, and she proposed that for just $1 million, she would lend her voice to the Star Trek song, as she named it. Naturally, she was told no, and threw her page of lyrics into the bin. But remnants of the song remain, as recited back by Gene Roddenberry, who had a photogenic memory. The song, written by Janet Jackson, included the words, "Flying through space, science in us all. Going from planet to planet, the adventurers of space become the good ones. Klingons and monsters, the Starfleet men can blast them all. Never forget the memories of space." This episode is the second in a string of famous courtroom drama episodes, which also include The Menagerie, The Drumhead, Deep Space Nine's Dax, and that first Q episode in Voyager. One episode that doesn't make this list is the Next Generation Series 4 episode, Future Imperfect, which tells the tale of Riker awakening several years in the future, only to discover that he's part of a plot concocted by a strange young alien. Although very competent an episode, it contains no courtroom drama at all, so it's to be excluded by all lists of Star Trek courtroom dramas. Even though this episode is called The Measure of a Man, there were 17 alternative names that were considered for the episode. Now, I won't bore you with all 17, but 16 of them are Man or Machine, The Measure of a Robot, The Measure of a Data, Data's Awful Choice, Sisters of Danger, 23rd Century Digital Boy, Unknown Fury, Data and Cashback, The Claw, Space Revenue, What Happened to Data, The Measure That We Got, Philippa, A Furnace in Court, August in Space, Robotic Hell, and Robotic Justice. It's quite possible that some of these were not considered at all, but just think what could have been. New Star Trek storyboard artist Lance Ranner famously approached Rick Burman with his bold new idea. He would produce a new format of episode art that would inspire the youth of today to view a show that they would normally scoff at. A week later, Lance brought in his finished poster art. No original versions of this exist, but based on rumours, I've recreated it, and it looked exactly like this. Not only did Rick not understand anything about the image at all, but he ordered all copies of it destroyed immediately. He wasn't against Lance trying new things, but he just didn't understand what he was looking at. Patrick Stewart's very good stunt double, Orlok Pock, was still in hospital from the accident during the previous episode, so this week Picard himself stepped up to the plate. For the entire run of time of the episode of The Measure of a Man, Captain Picard is played by Patrick Stewart himself, even for the rear and distant angles. Daniel Orlok-Pock's injuries would be nearly healed for the next episode, so he would resume his normal duty. But for this week alone, Patrick Stewart, the actor, gained a real shower of respect from his rival Star Trek actors. Now, figures released by the Science Fiction Association of America show some interesting statistics for the viewing figures for the midpoint of Star Trek Next Generation's second season. Around this point, more than 50% of the viewership were car owners, whereas viewership had shrunk dramatically in France. In the state of Idaho, more than 96% of people were watching Star Trek. That's more than the percent of Idaho citizens that own cats and dogs combined. Statistics also showed that 50%, give or take, of the audience were male, whereas only 30% of the audience were female. Finally, the amount of people without TVs not watching Star Trek had dropped for the second year running. Now on to the comment of the week. Marvel Horror C, or Marvel Horror K, says, I can't tell the difference between your jokes and actual facts because I don't know Star Trek like that. Well, that's great news. It's good that you must be a jovial fellow to think that there's jokes where there just isn't any. Any real Star Trek fan could vouch for these high-quality, real Star Trek facts. There's not a joke in sight. Thanks very much for watching these very interesting and very real Star Trek facts. You've probably learned a lot more about the episode To Measure a Man than you ever thought you would. Please hit that subscribe button unless you don't want to, and come back for my next load of facts unless you don't want to. You can watch some of the historic facts on here unless you don't want to, and hit a like and make a comment unless you don't want to. And I'll see you next time. Merry Christmas, ta-ta!